Hello and welcome to the JSA studio. I am your host, as always, Nathan, and today we are going to be predicting the entire 2023-2024 NFL season. Yep, all of it. Why? Because I can. Though I was so worried about whether or not I could, I didn't stop to ask whether I should or not. Jurassic Park reference, I thought it'd be funny. Anyway, let's go ahead and just jump right into it. Before I actually talk about the Vikings here, I just kind of want to explain the structure of this video, so don't go ahead and skip to your team, your part of the video. Listen to this first. So, to begin with, the order of this video is going to be decided by the division winner is going to be the first of the division, followed by the second team, the third team, and the last place team. I will be going in the order of the NFC first because I can, starting with the NFC North, then going East, South, and West, and then going to the AFC North, South, or Northeast, South, and West. When it comes to the records that I am predicting and the W's and the L's, that is universal. So here, week 1 versus Tampa, I had the Vikings winning that game. That is marked as a loss for Tampa Bay when we get to the NFC South portion of this video. So it's all universal, it's all connected. It all should work out even. I can't guarantee I didn't make a mistake, but I don't think I did. Going over here to the left side of the screen, your strength of schedule is based off of the win percentage of the teams that you played this year. It's used for tiebreakers in draft order, which I did come up with a draft over, as well as predicting the whole playoff scenario. Best and worst, I should honestly have put those in quotes. That's just my opinion. I do think what is the most realistic outcome is the actual record prediction down there on the right side of the screen. But there's a best case and a worst case scenario. Candidates, pretty self-explanatory, with Justin Jefferson being an Offensive Player of the Year candidate. But there are some teams where I just couldn't think of a contender for a national award, so I ended up doing a couple of team awards as well. And with all of the setup out of the way, let's go ahead and start talking about the Minnesota Vikings. When it comes down to it, I think you're the best team in the division. I think 10-7 is a realistic record prediction for you. I think that's probably the most likely outcome because your crossovers are a bit brutal this year with the AFC West, and then you're also catching a stray with the 49ers. So you're maybe 1 or 2 games under what a pure 500 schedule would look like for you. Week 1, I got you beating Tampa. Then I have you losing to the Eagles, losing to the Chargers. I just think they're better teams than you. Beating the Panthers, losing to the Chiefs, beating the Bears, losing to the 49ers. Those first 6 weeks are like super easy, tough, super easy, tough, super easy, tough, super easy, super easy. You're going down the list here. The Saints is probably one of the very few 50-50 games that I have on your schedule. The others probably being the Raiders in both matchups with the Lions. Outside of that, I don't really think there's a whole lot of wiggle room in your schedule because your crossovers are brutal. Best case scenario, I could see 12-5, and worst case scenario is probably 7-10. I don't really particularly see you losing a whole lot of games to bad teams this year. Your candidate that I decided to pick is Justin Jefferson to win Offensive Player of the Year again. I do have you winning the division and making the playoffs as the 4 seed. The Detroit Lions, I have you going 9-8 with a 3-3 record in the division and making the playoffs as a 6 seed. When you look at the schedule, it's middle of the pack. Like, it's literally middle of the pack. You're tied for 14th, 498. But that's really misleading in my mind because you play a lot of bad teams and you play a lot of really, really good teams. I'm not sure there's a whole lot of true 50-50 games for you. I'm not sure there's a whole lot of true 50-50 games for you. I think maybe the Raiders, potentially the Chargers, and potentially the Vikings are probably your 50-50 games. Maybe you could But, I could see a scenario where you beat the Packers twice. I could see a scenario where you pull off an upset against either the Ravens, Saints, or Dallas. So maybe you pick up another game there. I could see you beating the Bears twice. So that's why the best case scenario is 13-4. However, I could see you, Jared Goff regressing back to what Jared Goff was the 3 years prior to him breaking out this past year again. So then maybe 6-11 is what you're looking at. I think this is a team that got much better, but I think they were punching above their weight class last year. That was not a 9-win caliber of team, in my opinion. It was probably more like a 7-win team, and I do think you got better, but I think your matchups are a little bit brutal. I think if you had a true, honest-to-God, like, middle-of-the-pack schedule, even though you do have the 14th, as I talked about it, but again, that's a little bit misleading. I think if you had a real, honest-to-God, like every game was 50-50, we're playing teams of the same caliber, and you weren't running into massive mismatches in my mind, then I think you're probably like 11-6. So I think your schedule is probably a net -2 wins. So that's a bit disappointing, perhaps. As far as your candidate goes for awards, I think Jahmyr Gibbs is probably your best bet to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. I'm not really sure that he has a real chance to do that, but if he ends up hitting some big plays, probably get something like 600 receiving yards, 6 to 8 touchdowns, and it's a relatively down year offensively, I could see him winning the award, especially after that bye week if he really just starts to take off. Up next is the Green Bay Packers. Now, I've got you going 7-10 with 3-3 in the division, and I have you ending up at the 12th pick of the draft. So when you look at your schedule, there's a lot of 50-50 games. You do have one of the easiest schedules in the NFL, in my opinion, but I just don't trust the offense to win the games. And I think the defense probably takes a step back this year. I don't really have a reason to believe that. It's just a gut feeling. You go through your schedule, you end up with a W against the Bears, Falcons, Saints. You could maybe steal a W there if we're talking about it. And then Lions, Raiders, bye week, Denver, the Vikings, the Rams, Steelers, Chargers, at the Lions versus the Chiefs. I don't see you winning more than 1 or 2 of those games. And then you end up with pretty easy end to the schedule. I could see you winning out there. That wouldn't surprise me if you're gonna go post week 13 to the Chiefs. I think you could win your last final 5 games. That wouldn't be shocking to me, and maybe that's how you make the run to the playoffs. But my official prediction is 7-10, as I stated earlier. Best case scenario is probably 11-6. Worst is probably 6-11, just because the schedule is very easy. Your candidates, Jordan Love for Most Improved Player and Rashawn Gary for Comeback Player of the Year. Rashawn Gary was having a first or second team All-Pro type of season before he ended up getting hurt last year. So him coming back and dominating like what we saw last year in the brief stint that he was healthy, you could see him compete for that award there. Chicago, I think you got much better this year. I really do. I think Justin Fields is going to take a step forward. He is my favorite for Most Improved Player, which isn't actually an award. I probably should have mentioned that earlier, but that isn't an actual award in the NFL, but it is an award that I do just for fun. And he is my odds-on favorite to win that award this year. 6-11 is the prediction with 1-5 in the division. I think early on in the season, you're going to struggle to get it going a little bit, but I could see you in like a best case scenario, sort of doing what the Lions did last year, where after a bit of a brutal start to the season, you really get past the tough part of your schedule, which would be week 9. And then after that, like pretty much all of those games are winnable games. You know, you could beat the Lions, you could beat the Vikings, you could beat the Browns, you could beat the Packers. So you could end up winning out, or maybe going like 6-2 or in that last 8 game sort of stretch. So that's why I got 10-7 as your best and 3-14 as your worst. You do have one of the easiest schedules, according to me and my mathematics. So you could potentially do better than this pretty realistically, but I think that might be a little bit fool's gold. I think you're still probably 2 years away from really being a team that can make a run in the playoffs, potentially. That's assuming Justin Fields takes the kind of steps that I think he's going to take. But for this year, I have you ending up with the 11th pick of the draft. The Philadelphia Eagles. I think you're going to have another fantastic season this year. I have you going 14-3 and ending up as the 1 seed in the NFC. You're going 5-1 in the division. In my mind, you look at your schedule, it's pretty easy actually. As good as I think the NFC East is, you play the NFC West teams, which is pretty easy because I think you're clearly better than Seattle, and I think you got a good chance to beat the Niners, even though those are two really good teams. And then your other crossover is with the AFC East, which has basically the Bills and Miami and 2 fodder teams. But yeah, and then your stray crossovers are Tampa, which is pretty easy, and the Cardinals, which the Cardinals are the worst. Spoiler alert, the Cardinals are the worst team in the NFL. So best case scenario, I only got you the 3 losses to the Jets, the Bills, and Dallas. I think you could very easily beat the Jets. I think you probably lose 2 of the 4 toughest games on your schedule, which are the Jets, Chiefs, Bills, and Dallas both times. So I guess those are 5. So you probably go 2-3 or 3-2 in those games, and that's probably what's going to decide your season in my mind. But worst case scenario, I think you're still probably going 7-10 unless Jalen Hurts gets hurt. Jalen Hurts, I think, is going to be a candidate for the MVP again. I think Jalen Carter is also going to be a candidate for Defensive Rookie of the Year. I think he's actually probably the favorite for that award, in my opinion. Dallas, I think you're going to have a good year. I really do. My official prediction for you is 11-6 with 4-2 in the division, and you end up as the 5 seed in the NFC. And when you look at your schedule, you do have a couple of tough games against Seattle and the Eagles, and the Bills as well. Miami is also a tough game. The Chargers is a tough game. The Jets is potentially a tough game. Those are really your 50-50 games, I believe. So I think that's probably going to decide how you do. I do have the Pats upsetting you in week 4. I think maybe you potentially are looking a bit forward to the Niners the following week, which I do have you winning. That's one of those weird sort of inklings that you get. I just feel like you're going to win that game. I don't really know why. And then you have the Rams, which could have been a sneaky sort of trap game before you go to the Eagles, but you're coming off the bye, so I don't think that's going to happen. I do have you losing to Seattle. You could very easily win that game. You could very easily beat the Patriots. You could very easily beat Washington twice, but I think you're probably going to lose one of those games, or maybe a surprise upset by the Giants. I think this is a really good team, potentially a team that could compete for the Super Bowl. You do have a bit of a tougher schedule than most. You have tied for the 20th best schedule. Best case scenario, you're 14-3. That's probably, you beat the Pats, you beat Seattle, and Washington. You still probably lose some sort of combination with the Eagles, maybe the Eagles twice, but then you beat the Bills or the Chargers. I don't know. You kind of got to play with that a little bit, but I think 14-3 is probably your best case scenario, and 6-11 is probably the worst, again, barring severe injury. Dak, I think, could have an MVP type of season this year, or an Offensive Player of the Year type of season, and this really just sort of feels like the season where Micah Parsons is going to get his Defensive Player of the Year award. He's been a candidate the past 2 years. I think this is the year where they're just going to kind of give it to him and be like, okay, yeah, you're for real, and then move on. Washington, you're one of the most interesting teams in the NFL to me. Your strength of schedule is pretty much dead even. It's 505 win percentage and 17th overall. I am predicting you to go 8-9. I do kind of believe in Sam Howell. He is a nominee for Breakout Player of the Year for me. I had a top 50 grade on Sam Howell when he came out, so I thought that was a steal of the draft when you got him in the 6th round. I think he could potentially get you to a better record. I could see 10-7, but when you go through your schedule there, I think you've got 2 automatic L's to the Eagles. I think you probably split with the Giants, and best case scenario you split with the Dallas. With Dallas, maybe you win one of Seattle or Miami like I have you predicting. Could also lose to the Rams. Well, you're probably going to lose to the Niners and the Jets. So it's a little bit all over the place with your schedule. But then again, I could see you beating the Giants twice. I could see you beating Denver. I don't know. You have one of the highest variabilities of any team in the NFL this year, in my mind. But ultimately, I have you going 8-9, 2-4 in the division, and you end up with the 15th pick of the draft, with Chase Young being a candidate for comeback player of the year. I think he's going to ball out this year. I think he's going to stay healthy because I think he has to, and I think he's going to play really, really well. And then Sam Howell, as I mentioned earlier, was breakout player of the year. New York Giants, this is probably one of the 2 hottest takes that I have this year. I think this is going to be a bad year for you. I do not believe that Vanilla Vic Danny Dimes is going to end up being good. I think you've sort of fallen into the contract year fallacy, where he plays really good in the contract year and then he goes back to sucking. Now, your contract, you can get out of it after 2 years pretty easily. So it's not that bad, but, there's no guaranteeing Saquon stays healthy, and he was a big part of your success last year. There's just a ton of question marks for me on this team. I think your offensive line outside of Andrew Thomas and potentially Evan Neal at right tackle is trash. I don't really think you have a very good edge rush. I think you're good up the middle, but your edge rush is questionable. Kayvon Thibodeau, I think, again, if he could stay healthy, could be a breakout player of the year candidate, but I'm not counting on him staying healthy. In a perfect world, you probably don't end up 4-13 like I'm predicting, but this isn't a perfect world, sadly. If I was assuming perfect world, you'd probably be like 6-11. But at some points, you also just have a couple of tough breaks. But your schedule is brutal. The 20th overall schedule is not nearly an indicator of how brutal this schedule is. You always play the Jets because you always play the Jets. The Niners, Seattle, those are all teams that I think are clearly better than you. I think Dallas is clearly better than you. I think the Eagles are clearly better than you. I think the Saints are clearly better than you. You're also playing the Bills and Miami. I don't remember if I mentioned Miami or not. I think you could pretty easily lose to the Rams as well if they end up being able to stay healthy. I think they're going to be better than people think. This is a brutal schedule. I love Brian Daboll, but I think this year is going to be a bit more of a rebuilding year for you. And due to tiebreakers, you end up with the 3rd pick of the draft. New Orleans, you have the easiest schedule in the NFL by a mile, by almost a full 10th of a percentage point. It's brutal how easy your schedule is. It's absurd how easy your schedule is. I should have said not brutal. I have you going 11-6 with 4-2 in the division, ending up at the 3 seed. Probably got 2 automatic wins against Tampa. You probably, worst case scenario, win 3 of the 4, or split with both the Panthers and the Falcons, but you probably could win 3 out of 4 pretty easily. And then your crossovers with the AFC South, and that's against the Jags, who I think you are just a bad matchup for Jacksonville, which is why I have you beating Jacksonville. Then the Colts, that should be a relatively easy W. The Titans, you could beat the Titans as well. The Texans is probably a relatively easy W as well. And then your other strays, as I call them, are with the Vikings. That's a little bit concerning, but then you have the Pats, who you could very easily beat as well. I think you're going to be pretty good. I think, unfortunately, you're going to have to deal with Dennis Allen for another year after this year, because you're going to win the division. because I don't think anybody else in the division is capable of winning the division. So your candidate is Michael Thomas for Comeback Player of the Year. If he stays healthy, I do think he will be legitimately competing for that award. Atlanta, I think you are a very improved team, even though you're going to end up with almost the same record. And that's because I do not believe in Desmond Ridder. I do not think Desmond Ridder is a capable NFL quarterback, but I think your roster is good enough to win enough games to where you're not legitimately in the quarterback discussion for the draft, or at least not in the traditional way of drafting the quarterback. I got you going 3-3 in the division. I got you picking up an upset against the Saints, but outside of that, you do have a pretty easy schedule. But I just don't think Bijan Robinson is going to be able to carry you to more than 7 wins, just because I don't think a running back is capable of carrying a team to more than 7 wins in the modern NFL. And I know you're going to point out the Titans a few years ago when they were really good. They went like 14-3 or 13-4, however the fuck good they were, and they were the 1 seed. And then they ended up losing in their first playoff game. But with Derrick Henry when he was running for 2,000 yards, and you're like, oh, he carried them to a bit. No, Ryan Tannehill was a good quarterback that year. And they had A.J. Brown, I think, as well. So I don't see this team being anything other than middle of the pack to bad. 13-4 is your worst record. 11-6 is potentially the best. If Desmond Ridder ends up being something that I do not believe that he is, I could see that as a possibility, because you do have a sneaky good roster, especially offensively. I think you've got 2 legitimate receiving options in Kyle Pitts and Drake London. Drake London is a candidate for Breakout Player of the Year, but ultimately I do have you going 7-10 and ending up at the 13th pick of the draft. Carolina, pretty easy schedule if I'm being honest with you, but you have by far, I think out of anybody, the most variance that I could see out of a team this year, because your defense could be elite. It has that potential, and your offense could also be surprisingly good. Bryce Young could potentially come out and play really well year 1, so you could be as good as like a somewhat real contender in the NFC. I could legitimately see 13-4. I don't think you're probably beating Miami. I don't think you're probably beating Dallas. I don't think you're probably beating the Saints twice, and maybe you're not beating the Jags, but that's really about it. I could see you beating the Lions. I could see you beating Tampa. I mean, I even predicted it, but I could see you beating Tampa twice. That is, but ultimately I do have you going 6-11, because I think this team is going to struggle a lot early on as Bryce Young sort of has to adjust to the NFL. I could see you really struggling early on. This could be a like Detroit Lions sort of situation where everybody's talking about how good you looked in the second half of the year. I got you going 6-4 in your last 10 games and ending up with the 10th pick, but I think ultimately that will be the narrative rather than starting out 0-6 or 0-5 rather. I think the narrative will ultimately be how good you looked after the bye. And this is a roster that is pretty close to competing. I think the defense is maybe only a piece or 2 away, and I think you're like a number 1 wide receiver and maybe another decent receiving option away from having a pretty good offense. So the future is very bright for you, especially if Bryce Young ends up being as good as I believe he is going to be. Tampa, I'm going to be real with you. You know this is bad. You know this is bad. You know this is going to be bad. Now, unfortunately for you, it's not as worse as it's not. I don't think it's going to be as bad as it could be. I think Baker Mayfield it means nothing really. You know, you could do worse. Your schedule is surprisingly tough as well, and I just don't see you winning a whole lot of games this year, even though I think your roster is pretty good still. I don't think Todd Bowles is the answer long term. I think this is probably his last year as the head coach, and I think you're going to be in the quarterback sweepstakes this year, but I think you kind of know that too as well. I have you picking up your W's against the Bears, the Falcons, Saints, and Panthers. I think that's most likely where you're going to win those games. I could see you beating the Colts or the Panthers potentially as well. Could see you beating the Falcons twice. That's probably how you get to 7-10 in a best case scenario. You are not a candidate for the team award, which I'll get to at some point in this video, but I have Tristan Wirfs as an All-Pro. I think that's probably going to be your best chance to win a national award, quote unquote. So yeah, I end up having you with the 4th pick of the draft. San Francisco. Now, I don't really know how a team this good ended up with a schedule this bad, the 7th easiest schedule in the NFL, and via my calculations, I could pretty easily see you beating the Steelers, the Dallas, and the Bengals. I could see you winning those 3 games as well. That's how you end up at 15-2. But I think you probably lose to the Eagles and the Ravens. In my opinion, I could very easily be wrong, but I have you going 12-5 overall with a 6-0 record inside the division and ending up as the 2 seed in the NFC. I've got Nick Bosa as a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. I have Trey Lance as a Breakout Player of the Year candidate, and Brock Purdy as a Comeback Player of the Year candidate. Now, obviously, Trey Lance or Brock Purdy are both not going to be competing for that award. Who ends up starting is probably going to compete for that award. I ultimately believe it's going to be Brock Purdy starting for you. Seattle, you are also one of the teams that I think has the biggest variance out of anybody in terms of how good or bad you could be. I could see you legitimately being in the quarterback sweepstakes, and I could also see you being one of the best teams in the entire NFL. And all of that comes down to Geno Smith. If Geno Smith plays as good as he did last year, I think you're probably closer to 12 wins. If he reverts to what he's been his entire career outside of last year, you're probably 4 wins. I think something in the middle of the road is more likely, which is why I have you going 9-8 with 3-3 in the division and ending up as the 7 seed in the NFC. I have you losing to the Lions. You could beat the Lions. You could beat the Rams as well. I think you could also potentially pick up an upset win over either the Bengals or the Niners. Washington, it could also be another win. Some combination of those is how you get to 12-5. Schedule is relatively easy, but a bit, a bit below average schedule-wise. And the candidate who has the best chance of winning an award, in my opinion, is Devon Witherspoon winning Defensive Rookie of the Year. The Los Angeles Rams, I'm not sure what this team is going to do, and a lot of that depends upon Matthew Stafford. If he can play and be what he's been for his whole career when he's been healthy, I think 7-10 is potentially a really realistic option, but your team lacks weapons offensively, and depth on the offensive line is a big issue. Your defense is going to take a massive step back as well. I'm just not sure about this team's real chances of doing anything big time this year. I think best case scenario, you're at 10-7. Maybe you sneak into the playoffs and lose in the first round. Matthew Stafford could potentially win Comeback Player of the Year. Aaron Donald could always and forever win Defensive Player of the Year. I could see you beating maybe Seattle, maybe Washington, and the Giants, and that's probably how you get to 10 wins as opposed to what I have laid out here. But this might be a bit of a down year, kind of a reloading year. You'll have a better cap situation this next offseason, so you can go out and get some pieces. And you'll also have draft picks, unlike normal. So, yeah, I think this is going to be a bit of a downer for you this year. Arizona, wow. I have you going 1-16 just because I don't have the balls to predict you to go 0-17. But I genuinely do not think Kyler Murray will be back until maybe week 11 at the earliest. And even if he does come back, I don't think he makes much of a difference. I do like Paris Johnson at tackle, but I think he's probably your only starting caliber offensive lineman. I think you have Marquise Brown and DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver. That's potentially a pretty good duo, but then you have fuck all everywhere else. I think your defense is going to be atrocious, and I think you all know this too as well. But heading into the offseason, you are probably the most interesting team in the NFL next offseason. So I'm not going to sit down here and talk about why I think every team in the NFL is better than you. But you're going to have you ending up with the first pick going 0-6 in the division, 1-16 overall. And as it says down here on the left, team is a MESS award candidate. MESS stands for Most Entertaining Shit Show. It is the most favorite and most brilliant thing that I've ever come up with is that award, the MESS award, and you are a candidate for that. Heading over to the AFC now, Baltimore. I have you going 13-4, 4-2 inside the division. I think you split with the Steelers and the Bengals. I think you pick up a stray L against the Jags, but it could also beat the 49ers. I think you win one of those games and lose the other. And then also I have you picking up an upset loss against Miami because I think Miami is a sneaky good team this year. I have you end up being the 3 seed at 13-4, which is kind of ridiculous because I'd put you at the 2 seed in the NFC. But 14-3 is the best I could see you going. Maybe 15-2. Maybe you could beat the Jags and Miami, but I think you lose one of those games. Your best candidate for a national award is Lamar Jackson to win MVP again. I think he's going to come out this year and prove that he is legitimately one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. I fully expect him to come out and play very, very well, assuming he doesn't get hurt again. But the Super Bowl window is still open, in my opinion. Moving on to the Cincinnati Bengals. I think you're going to be really good. I have you going 12-5, but I do have you losing a couple of games that maybe you could win. You lose to the Browns, you lose to Steelers, you could probably win those games. So 14-3 is probably the best case scenario. I think you have a couple of real legitimate candidates to win awards. Joe Burrow might get an MVP. I think he'll get one at some point in his career. It might be this year. Jamar Chase could win Offensive Player of the Year, and Miles Murphy is a real contender for Defensive Rookie of the Year, in my opinion. Overall, I think this is a really, really good team. I think you're a Super Bowl contender. I think there's 6 of them in the AFC, and I think you're one of them. The AFC is a brutal division right now, or conference right now, and the AFC North is a brutal division. I fucking flipped both of them because I suck. Anyway, I think you're really, really good this year. I think you're going to do really, really well, assuming nobody gets hurt. The Steelers. I've learned my lesson with the Steelers. As you can see, worst case scenario, you're going to go 9-8. These past couple of years, I did not think you were going to be very good at all, and you've gone 9-8 both years. So the worst case scenario, you're going 9-8. I do have you going 10-7. You do have a very easy schedule, tied for the 5th easiest schedule. Kenny Pickett is a real candidate for Breakout Player of the Year. He might be the AFC favorite. George Pickens is also another candidate. I think he's going to be very good. I could see you beating the Raiders and the Texans. I do have you just sort of picking up some stray L's this year, from the Titans and the Raiders and the Pats and the Texans. But I do have you winning some games that you probably could lose as well, like the Rams and the Niners and the Bengals. So I think those all kind of balance out somehow, some way, and I think you probably end up 10-7. And unfortunately, in the AFC, that is not good enough to get you into the playoffs. Cleveland. Yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I think you're going to be bad. I do not believe Deshaun Watson is a capable NFL quarterback anymore. What I saw in his 7 games last year looked like a washed football player who forgot how to play football after taking almost 2 years off. I really think you're going to end up pretty bad this year. Maybe not 3-14 like I'm predicting, but also you have a very, very tough schedule. I don't see it being better than 7-10 this year. I just don't see it. I have questions about your offensive line. It's gotten worse each of the past 3 years, and I think it's going to get worse again. I think teams are going to be somewhat motivated to play you because they're going to view you as sort of like an easy win, or bad teams are going to view you as a team that they could actually beat, which is why I have you picking up some strays against the Colts and the Texans and teams like that. But I think this is going to be a bad year for you, and you're going to be in the quarterback sweepstakes. For what it's also worth, I also don't believe in Ken Stefanski very much. I think he sort of caught lightning in a bottle that one year, and then I think you're going to go back to being bad. I really don't want you to be bad. My mother is a Browns fan, but I just got to be honest with you. I think you're probably going to end up with the second worst record in the NFL, in my opinion. So buckle up. You are also a candidate for the Mess Award for the most entertaining shit show. So get ready for that. Buffalo, I've got you going 14-3 and ending up as the 1 seed in the AFC. I think you got better this year. I think your biggest weakness was the fact that you didn't have anybody to throw the ball to outside of Stephon Diggs. And I think Dalton Kincaid is very much going to be somebody who takes the load off of him a bit. So I do have you losing a couple of weird games like to Washington. I just think that's an upset game. And the Jets, I think the Jets are going to want to come out and prove that they're for real. But then you get them back later on in the season. I think the Bengals are a tough matchup for you. You do play the Chiefs, which who I have you beating, just because. Well, we'll get to the playoffs because you do match up in the playoffs. But I do have you winning that game, beating the Chiefs. So maybe that could give you some confidence heading into the playoffs where you will probably play the Chiefs again. Worst case scenario, I think you go 10-7. Best case scenario, 15-2. Maybe you beat Washington. It's just every team sort of has that random game where they just lose to a team that they have no business losing to, and that's going to be Washington. That's just the team that I picked. So yeah, Dalton Kincaid is also a candidate for Offensive Rookie of the Year in my opinion. I think he's going to have north of 1,000 yards this year. So I think you're going to be really good. The Jets, Jets, Jets. Shout out to you if you understand that reference. You know, I got you pulling off the upset against the Bills week 1, losing to the Chiefs and Dallas, the Chargers, and then the Bills again, splitting with Miami and splitting with the Pats. You could beat the Pats twice. The Pats aren't going to be very good this year, but the real question is how good is Aaron Rodgers going to be? Can Aaron Rodgers go back to being a good quarterback now that he has a middle-of-the-pack offensive line and some weapons to actually throw the goddamn ball to? I think it's possible. Last year he was. I'm not going to sugar. Last year he was a bad quarterback. I'm an NFC North fan. Okay, I watched all of the games that he played in. Okay, he was a bad quarterback last year. I gave you an F- on that trade, by the way. Giving up a first-round pick because you're giving up a first-round pick is absurd to get him. I don't think he makes you a Super Bowl contender, which is why I have you just sneaking into the playoffs as a 7 seed. But I think you're going to be a very good team. I think Sauce Gardner and Quentin Williams are Defensive Player of the Year candidates. I think he might have the best defense in the NFL. And I think the offense, even if Rodgers just plays as well as he did last year, I think the offense is going to be average, and that's good enough to get you to 11, 12 wins. Miami, I really wanted you to be really good this year because I really like the way that your roster has been built, but you have the second hardest schedule in the NFL. This is, just absolutely brutal. If you played a middle-of-the-pack schedule, I think you win 3 or 4 more games, but you're not playing a middle-of-the-pack schedule. You have the second hardest schedule in the NFL. You don't really have any, gimme games, really. Maybe Denver and the Patriots twice, but those are the only games that are, teams that are bad. You know what I mean? The Giants are potentially also a bad team. The Panthers could potentially be a bad team as well, but I don't know, man. This schedule is just brutal. I wanted to put Tua as the breakout player of the year candidate, but he kind of broke out last year. So same thing with Jalen Waddle, even though neither one of them really gets the respect that they deserve. So I end up going with Tyreek Hill as for offensive player of the year. He's probably your best chance to get a national award. Unfortunately, you're missing the playoffs. I have you going and getting the 17th pick of the draft. New England, I think you are way better than your record is going to indicate. But you have the hardest schedule in the NFL, in my opinion. It is brutal. It is absurd how hard this schedule is. Your teams almost have a 600 winning percentage. That's insane. The best case scenario, I got you going 9-8, but that's like if Mac Jones becomes something that I haven't seen out of him yet. I think he's going to be closer to his rookie year than he was last year. I think the sophomore slump sort of got to him a little bit. Also, he didn't have an offensive coordinator. This year he does. This to me is a team for next season, not this season. This season, I think it's going to be pretty bad. I think you don't really have anybody to throw the football to, and I don't really think your defense has some holes, specifically at the second level. Christian Gonzalez, I think, is going to be a stud. I think he's going to be a top 5 corner in football during his prime. And you have other pieces in that secondary that are really, really good too. You've got some serious pass rushers as well. So the defense, I think, is going to be good. The offense, I think, is going to be probably below average to bad. And your schedule is going to cause you to lose 3 or 4 more games than you probably should. Broke my heart doing this to you because I really like your roster. But, man, that schedule is just hard. Moving on to the Jags, I think you're going to have a pretty good year. I don't really think you got any better this offseason. In fact, you might have gotten worse. I think Anton Harrison is a downgrade from Jawan Taylor, but I still think you're going to be pretty good. Calvin Ridley should help the team in terms of offensively, maybe open up some more rushing lanes by being more explosive offensively. I got you going 11-6, 5-1 in the division. The division is pretty bad. I think you're perfectly capable of beating the Colts and the Texans twice. Split with the Titans just because I think the Titans are better than both of them, even though I do think the Titans aren't going to be great. Have the exact middle schedule of the NFL, so I think this is pretty much your schedule's pretty solid. I don't think you're getting any extra L's or extra W's from your schedule. Trevor Lawrence is my candidate for breakout player of the year, or a candidate for breakout player of the year. Kind of broke out last year, but I really think he's going to break out this year, and break out this year. I got you at the 4 seed in the AFC. I could see you getting up to 13-4, which I believe would still make you the 4 seed, even if you got the 13-4, because the AFC is ridiculous. But it's just worst case scenario, I could see you going 8-9, but I don't really think that's very likely. I think 11-6 is where you're going to be. Titans, I don't really know how to feel about you. You've got a lot of variance in the way that this season could go. I could see, if Ryan Tannehill can sort of capture the magic, I could see you going 12-5 again, because I think your offensive line is getting back into shape. I think your defense is pretty good. Derrick Henry, hopefully, he could stay healthy and be a factor. But I don't really see all of that happening. I think at some point, I would say, just based off of the narrative arc of this season, after those 4 or 3 straight L's, week 11, 12, 13, maybe Miami, you start throwing out the kid Will Levis, and then sort of end the season on a pretty easy run. Maybe you end up 9-8, but I got you going 8-9, 3-3 in the division, and ending up with the 16th pick of the draft. My candidate for you is Treylon Burks for breakout player of the year. I think he's going to be a pretty good wide receiver in the NFL, assuming he could stay healthy. Houston, you're up next. Unlike last year, where I believed you were going to be the worst team in football, I do not believe you're going to be the worst team in football this year. You do have a pretty easy schedule, but I just don't believe in the roster right now. I do like D'Amico Ryans, but the roster is pretty bad. Your candidates, just to get those out of the way, it's pretty obvious. C.J. Stroud, Rookie of the Year. Will Anderson, Defensive Rookie of the Year. I could see you beating the Falcons. I could see you maybe pulling an upset over the Saints. You could maybe beat the Colts twice. And maybe pulling an upset against the Titans or the Jets. Maybe you could beat Denver. I think you could get to 10-7 if C.J. Stroud comes out and is just phenomenal. Which isn't an impossibility, but I do think it's unlikely. I think C.J. Stroud needs a year or two to really get going, and also I think he needs weapons, which you just don't have right now. I think you'll get them in the future, but you just don't have the weapons right now. for me to feel confident that this team is going to be very, very good. I've got you going 5-12 and ended up with the 5th pick of the draft. I accidentally went out of order here, but that's fine. The Texans were the worst team in the division due to tiebreakers, but the Colts here are the 3rd worst team. I've got you best case scenario going 9-8. Again, pretty easy schedule. Worst case scenario 2-15. That's if Anthony Richardson just absolutely shits the bed. I do think you could see a similar season out of Anthony Richardson to what Justin Fields did last year. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. And that's probably good enough to get you 5 wins. I have serious questions about your offensive line, especially the tackle position. I think your receiving core is decent, but I don't think it's anything special. Jonathan Taylor could maybe get going, and then you could probably just smash mouth your way to a few wins. Best case scenario is 9-8 in my mind, and that's if Anthony Richardson really takes off throwing the football and is a somewhat of a threat. Not, I was going to say legitimate threat, but like not even legitimate. It doesn't necessarily need to be a legitimate threat. He just needs to be able to throw the ball and be able to hit a couple of passes. You know, maybe you pass the ball 20 times a game and run the ball 50 times a game. And then you can end up 9-8, kind of like what the Ravens were Lamar Jackson's rookie year. But I don't really think that you have the roster to pull off what the Ravens did that year. Could be wrong, but I think this year you're still probably looking at another rebuilding year. So I got you ended up with the 6th pick here. Anthony Richardson is a candidate for Offensive Rookie of the Year. I believe that he has the possibility to end up as maybe the best rookie quarterback. I think that the safest bet is probably Bryce Young, but Anthony Richardson could definitely be that guy. Moving on to the AFC West here, the Kansas City Chiefs, I got you 14-3, going 5-1 in the division. You end up with the 2nd seed. I got the Bills beating you in the regular season, as well as the Eagles and the Chargers being able to split. The main reason that you're going to lose to the Chargers in the last week of the season is because with the loss to the Bills and the way that their schedule's set up, they already secured the 1 seed by the time this week came out. And you're just going to rest your starters. You're not going to risk anything. Chargers are also just in the playoffs already. They're going to be whatever seed that they are. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but we'll get to them next. So you're not going to get the bye, so you're going to rest your players week 18. I think potentially you could go 17-0, legitimately. You have the tied for the 3rd hardest schedule in the NFL because you're the defending Super Bowl champs. And I think you are arguably head and shoulders above everybody in the NFL. I think Sky Moore, I didn't actually put him down just because Patrick Mahomes is your guy, but I think Sky Moore could be a breakout player of the year candidate. It wouldn't surprise me if Felix Undunki Uzoma, I think that's how you say his name, ended up being a real contributor year 1, but probably not a defensive player of the year candidate in my mind. All in all, you're going to do what you're going to do. As long as you have Patrick Mahomes, you're going to be Super Bowl contenders. I got the Chargers here going 12-5, ending up as the 5 seed. You know, you got a tough schedule too. You got the 4th hardest schedule in the NFL. I mean, man, it's just is pretty brutal. I could see you losing to the Vikings, maybe the Titans and Miami. 9-8 is your floor. 14-3 is the ceiling. You could pretty easily beat the Lions, maybe the Raiders as well, and then the Ravens. You could also potentially beat them if you're going to beat one of those 3 remaining teams, the Chiefs, the Bills, and the Ravens. I would predict the Ravens, even though I have you losing all 3. You got a little bit of variance to you, but Justin Herbert, is my candidate for you to win Offensive Player of the Year. I think he's going to be much better this year with Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator. I think you're going to be a legitimately good football team, as opposed to just sort of backing into the playoffs last year and collapsing down the stretch the year before that. Denver, I think you're going to be better than last year, but not by a whole lot. I got you going 6-11. I could see 9-8. I do think Sean Payton is going to get you on the right track eventually, but that's not going to be with Russell Wilson as your quarterback. I think that is going to go down as one of the worst trades in the history of professional sports. I think he's washed. I could be completely wrong, but that's just my opinion. I think you're a middle-of-the-road team with a hard schedule, so you end up losing 2 more games than you probably would with a pure 500 schedule. I got you 2-4 in the division. You end up with the 9th pick, and you are a candidate for the Mess Award, most entertaining shit show. That is all I've got for you. The Raiders with the next pick, or not the next pick, with the next team up here. I got you going 5-12. I do think you're going to be better than people wanting to admit. I know that's weird because I'm saying you're going to go 5-12, but you have a very tough schedule. You're tied for 29th, which is the 3rd hardest schedule in the league. Worst case scenario, I could see you going 2-15. Best case scenario, I got you going 9-8. You know, you look at this, you could beat Denver, maybe. You could beat the Packers, the Pats and the Bears, maybe. Maybe you could pull an upset against Miami or the Jets. Maybe you can beat Denver twice. I don't know. But you're probably going to lose to the Vikings. You're probably going to lose to the Chiefs twice. You're probably going to lose to the Chargers twice. Even though I actually have you beaten the Chargers, but you could lose to the Chargers twice. I think this is a pretty brutal schedule. Even though I actually think your team is pretty solid. I think you're like a 500 ball club, but I think your schedule is going to cause you to lose 3 more games than you probably should if you had like a pure 500 schedule. And that wraps up all the team predictions. So we're real quick going to go through my playoff predictions. Here are the matchups for round 1. You have the 7-seed Jets versus the 2-seed Chiefs, the 6-seed Bengals versus the 3-seed Ravens, the 5-seed Chargers versus the 4-seed Jaguars. And then on the NFC, you've got the 7-seed Seattle versus the 4-seed or the 2-seed 49ers, the 6-seed Detroit Lions versus the 3-seed Saints, 5-seed Dallas versus 4-seed Vikings. And I've got the Chiefs, Ravens, Jags, Niners, Detroit, and Dallas winning in the first round. The only reason I have Detroit winning is because I am a Lions fan and I want to witness a playoff game. Just give me this one. Round 2, I've got the Jags versus the Bills, Ravens, Chiefs, Detroit Eagles, Dallas, the 49ers. And I've got the Bills, Chiefs, Eagles, 49ers winning all of those games. Those are the high seeds. Even though having all of the 1 versus 2 matchups, I'm not sure that's happened in a pretty long time. But that's what I am predicting, at least with these teams. That if everything breaks the way that I want it to, or the way that I'm predicting it to. Round 3, Niners, Eagles, Bills, Chiefs. I've got the Niners beating the Eagles and the Chiefs beating the Bills. And we're going to round 2 of the Niners versus the Chiefs, and spoiler alert, it ends the same way as the first round, with the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl. Very creative. I'm really sticking my neck on this prediction here. The Chiefs are going to win the Super Bowl. But that's all I got. If you disagreed with me, if you had problems with the way that I ranked your teams, go ahead and tell me why in the comment section below. But I mean, what do I know? After all, I'm just some asshole. And I'll see you next time.